Next up, we have Dr. June Atkinson, Superintendent of Public Instruction. She is with us. She is coming to respond to some requests that came from this committee. And Dr. Atkinson, I'll let you just tell us the request that you're responding to, and thank you for being with us this morning. We've got 15 minutes for you, and then 5 minutes for Q&A. We ran 5 minutes over on the last one, so maybe they'll take it easy on you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Holloway. It's again a pleasure to be in front of you to explain to you in detail and to answer the questions that have been proposed and have been posed for me to answer. I am June Atkinson, State Superintendent, and during my 25 years plus in public education and in working in the Department of Public Instruction, I have had the responsibility at least 4 times to lead the effort to revise the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. And I know that any time we have gone through the process of revising the North Carolina Standard Course of Study, we have always had questions about age appropriateness, the availability of resources, professional development of teachers. So in some respects, this is deja vu for me, because we have had these questions anytime we change the standard course of study for North Carolina. I have been asked to answer these questions. One question is to outline the flexibility that North Carolina has for modifying, for adding to, or outright removing any of the Common Core standards, and what is the process, and who initiates that process. And then the second question I have been asked is to provide evidence for the claim that the Common Core standards are internationally benchmarked. And then the third question I've been asked to respond to is to provide specific details about the amount of training that has been provided dealing with the Common Core standards and the essential standards. And then talk about how many teachers have been trained and at what cost, and how was that training conducted. In order to answer these questions, you have, as members of the General Assembly, 4 attachments. Attachment 1 gives you the chronology of the work that has been done in our state since 2010 to prepare our teachers for the new standard course of study. Also, Attachment 2 provides for you a bibliography of the information regarding the international benchmarking that was a part of the standard core development. And then the third attachment specifically speaks to the English language arts. And then the attachment 4 deals with some of the areas that Lieutenant Governor mentioned about assessment, 2 assessments that are recognized in over 65 countries about how students are doing around the world. But just as a reminder, according to state statute and according to the Constitution, the State Board of Education has the sole responsibility for developing a standard course of study. The buck stops with the State Board of Education in developing standards of what students should know and be able to do. The standard course of study includes the following: arts, which would include music, visual arts, theater, dance. We have career technical education. We have English language arts. We have healthful living, mathematics, science, second languages, and social studies. In 2008-2009 time period, or 2007, excuse me, through the 2009 time period, the State Board of Education appointed an Accountability Standards Commission. And that commission recommended that we do something for the first time in our history. And that was to revise the entire standard course of study at one time. Prior to that, when I was in charge of the standard course of study, we staggered the revision of these. We did arts, for example, first year we did career technical education, the second year we did English language arts, the third year. But the recommendation was that all of the standards be changed at one time. And so in 2010, after going through a 6-step process, the State Board of Education, where the buck stops when it comes to the standard course of study, the State Board of Education adopted new standards in all of these areas, including mathematics and English language arts, based on the Common Core standards. And the book, attachment 1, gives you greater detail about that. And when those standards were adopted, because it is a guiding principle of the State Board of Education, you never have tests that are not aligned with what kids are to know and be able to do. It is unfair, it is unjust, it is un-American to test kids on something that you do not know, that they do not know that there is a standard. So in 2010, because of General Statute 115-81 and 115C-83, where it requires us to have an end-of-grade and end-of-course test in mathematics and English language arts in grades 3 through 8 and in 2 subjects at the high school level. We started the movement forward of field testing items that were embedded in the tests that were being given in order to assess the new standards, which included English language arts and mathematics. And they were field tested, and those tests were given for the first time in last year. And so, in keeping with the guiding principle that you never test on something that is a mystery to students, these standards have been assessed for 1 year after extensive field testing, and they are the tests that will be given this school year to determine a snapshot, nothing else, a snapshot of what our students are, how they are doing in English language arts and mathematics. So how does the State Board go about adopting the standard course of study? This policy, in fact, I wrote this policy many years ago with extensive input about the process that was necessary to ensure that the citizens of North Carolina, our teachers, our principals, our parents had a way of having input into this system. It is important to me as an educator for us to have extensive input about what is important for students to be able to know and be able to do. And so that process by State Board policy, with references to General Statute 115C-81 through 83, identifies a 6-step process. And according to the State Board of Education, that every 5 years we shall examine the standard course of study in all of those subjects and determine where we need to make changes. So a 6-step process, the number of years between revisions is 5. And here are the steps: review data, research, do surveys, do feedback, establish writing teams to develop the drafts of proposed changes, submit the draft for public review and input. The 4th is to revise the draft. In fact, in some drafts, we have had as many as 13 drafts for a particular subject. Then it's submitted to the State Board of Education for discussion and approval. And then after that occurs, then we conduct professional development for teachers and administrators across the state. And again, the statutory authority where the buck stops and where the authority is given is in this statute, because it authorizes the State Board of Education to establish a standard course of study. Now, what flexibility does North Carolina have in changing any of the standards, including those which were adopted by the Common Core? The State Board of Education, under current law, has the absolute authority to make any changes in the standards. It does have a policy, however, that says there is a 5-year process. And that development and revision, which I have just covered with you, gives you the structured process identified by the State Board of Education. It is not the responsibility, according to North Carolina's Constitution, it is not the responsibility, according to the State Board of Education, for the federal government or any other state, country, or entity to have that responsibility. It lies with the North Carolina State Board of Education, and again, that's where the flexibility is. So the State Board of Education has the authority and has exercised that authority during the 4 times that I told you that we've gone over. We have revised the standard course of study. And let me give you 2 examples to illustrate the absolute flexibility that the State Board of Education has. Number 1, this body, in its last session, believed that it was important to add cursive writing to the standard course of study. You passed the bill, we turned it around, we put it in the standard course of study, and it is now a part of the standard course of study. Now, when you really read the Common Core standards for mathematics, you will notice that it does not go any further than Algebra 2 or Math 3. Consequently, knowing from the past that our universities believe and our community colleges believe that 4 units of mathematics are important, we added to the standard course of study in mathematics advanced mathematics courses, including advanced functions and modeling, courses dealing with pre-calculus, advanced placement courses. All of our advanced placement courses are not a part of the Common Core. And so consequently, we have these courses being taught all over North Carolina. The other thing is that any school district in this state has the flexibility to add content. Now, I'm sure my colleagues may say, who are in the teaching profession, that if you implement if you implement the standard course of study, then it may be difficult to add to. But there is that flexibility. The next question, are the standards internationally benchmarked? If you would look at attachments 2 and 3, you will see over 100 references for mathematics showing the literature that was referenced in establishing those standards. And you will also see in attachment 3, English Language Arts Standards. And I'd like you just to pull this out because I want to reference one thing for you. If you would go, attachment 3, if you would go to page 2 of 3. And I just want to point out several things here. The General Assembly has a law, in fact it's 115C-105.40. The law says that the State Board of Education shall align where appropriate and where possible our English Language Arts standards and our mathematics standards with the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And so if you would look at 2 of 3, you will see detailed information about that alignment when it comes to English Language Arts. And of course, because of time, I will not go into depth about what that material says. Then if you would look at, as Lieutenant Governor Forrest pointed out, he mentioned the TIM study and he also mentioned PISA. These are assessments, as he indicated, of how students are doing across the world. TIMS involves 63 countries. The PISA exam involves 65 countries. And I will just call to your attention without going into detail. If you look at attachment 4, you look at the pages 23 through 24, you will see the alignment of that assessment with the standards that are part of the standards in mathematics. So just to summarize, the standards are international benchmark, and in the material you will see the benchmarking and the statements dealing that the benchmarking with Canada, with the United Kingdom, and with other Korea and other countries doing a having higher scores than North Carolina or the United States have had in the past. So here's a quote from OECD, which involves 65 countries in math. The strict implementation of the Common Core state standards for mathematics would undoubtedly improve PISA results. Let me hasten to add that a standard by itself has never taught a single child. And a standard is definitely insufficient, totally insufficient, to be able to improve student achievement in our state. They are necessary, but not sufficient. The other alignment with the standards include ACT, SAT, and GED. Well, this is a huge fact, and I want you to just look at this for a moment. When we started in 2010 with our ongoing professional development for our teachers, and then compare that time to today, 49% of our teachers are new to their positions this year compared to 2010. And Senator Barefoot, that certainly does underline one of your comments earlier in another session about the importance of professional development and ongoing professional development for our teachers. Also, 69% of our administrators are new to their positions since 2010 compared to today. So you see a challenge when it comes to making sure that every teacher, the 95,000 teachers we have in our state, are prepared to implement the entire spectrum of the North Carolina Standard Courses study. So what have we done since 2010 to prepare students?
Dr. Atkinson, you could just wrap it up. You're just a little over time, but thank you.
Thank you for your reminder. So you look here, you see the number of teachers have been trained through the Summer Institute, the online modules, the number that have been completed, the resources that we have, the cost. And I want to bring your attention to this. This is always a question. In 2011 and 12, 2013, you made available to the school districts across the state a choice of going to school 185 days or using those days to improve student achievement. All of our school districts chose those. So all the schools had the opportunity to offer 5 days of professional development, 2011 and 2013, to prepare. There are details indicating that our school districts have spent $44 million on implementing the new standards for all disciplines, not just mathematics and English language arts. And the state has spent $22 million to implement the new standards for all disciplines. We have done a survey of our students, of our teachers in January and February. These charts give you how many hours of training they have received, but please keep in mind what I said about the newness. Have they used the resources? The question about I have access to curriculum materials aligned with the new standards. Did I receive professional development? And then in 2003, I pulled this out from a survey we did, 2003, when we changed standards, and we asked the question, what do you think would prepare you more additional time with more teachers and more resources? The voices, what would help you feel more prepared? How well prepared do you feel? How would you rate the quality of the standards? To what extent do you agree with the statement? And there, I have finished.
Thank you, Dr. Atkinson. Please don't find me rude. We just got a large agenda. And same to the members of the committee. We just got to keep things flowing if we're going to get out of here in a reasonable time. So we'll take just a couple minutes for questions. Senator Barefoot, I saw you had your hand up, and you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have two questions. One is in regard to governance. So you established that the State Board of Education is where the buck stops. And you explained how the process that we would go to if we added things to the existing standards or to math and English. But the question I have is, what is the process we go through if we want to take things away? And if we take things away, what impact does it have on the national comparison in math and English?
Okay. Number one, the process to delete or remove would be the same, because in the past we have been criticized that our standards are too wide and they need to be narrow, so we have been on that path. The second question is that we know that the ACT, SAT, GED, PISA, TIMS, all of those align with those standards, so we would be doing a disservice to our children who those tests in the big scheme of things mean something as far as college admission, as far as being successful in the world of work. And so if we don't have that close alignment, I think the General Assembly was wise to talk about the National Assessment of Educational Progress. We would be emphasizing, we may not be emphasizing something in the standards that our students would be assessed. In other words, for the fourth grade, or let's say in elementary, let's say that we are teaching the students how to apply the use of decimals. If that's not a part of the curriculum, it doesn't, I mean, the standards, it doesn't mean the kids can't learn that, it's just it's not a part of it. So they would be assessed on something that, for which they may not have had exposure.
Well, I guess my comment on that is, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what's got a lot of people really nervous is that if you were to take something away and the assessment were to still require it, that we would go to a process where we're comparing apples and oranges nationally, and that's why people feel like they're trapped by these standards, because there is a threshold, whether it's written or not, as to how much you can change it. My second question has to do with the implementation. I know we've spent a lot of money, and the last time you were here before us, you told us that LEAs could submit waivers to draw down these race to the top funds for the implementation. The voices of the teachers didn't look all that great. I mean, if they were given 5 days and some of them only spent 1 day, 8 hours preparing, even if they're new, my question is, were there any LEAs that did not submit waivers to draw down funds to prepare their teachers for the Common Core?
First, let me go back to the test question. North Carolina has had an ongoing principle that you never test students on standards for which they are not being taught. And so North Carolina has had a proud history of matching the standards students should know and be able to do with the alignment of the test. A long time ago, when some states moved to testing, they did not do that alignment, so it's grossly unfair to assess a student for something that has not been taught, and that's why we have had the history of North Carolina tests. The Race to the Top grant, after we got it in 2011, I believe, each school district had to do a plan of work, and they included how they would use the money, and they included that they would use it for standards and assessment. They were allowed to do the waiver. The waiver that I was talking about, however, is that each school district said, we'll either go to school 185 days, or we'll use those 5 days for professional development to implement the entire standard courses study. And in the first year, all school districts, I believe, did that. And in the second year, I believe there were 2 school districts that did not ask for that waiver to use the 185 days, to use the 5 days for professional development. Please keep in mind that those surveys that I showed you included the entire North Carolina standard courses study. We did not tease out just our mathematics teachers and our English language arts teachers.
Got 4 people on deck, and then we're going to move on. And I've had some folks in here who are members of the General Assembly who want to ask questions, but if you're not a member of this committee, you cannot. So I do apologize. And members, if you can keep it brief. Senator Tillman's got to eat lunch at 12:30 sharp, and he's not going to take 5 minutes.
I always do 11:30.
Senator Tillman, then Representative Belmore, Senator Farman, and Representative Speciale. Senator Tillman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Dr. Atkinson, thank you for being here. A couple of brief questions, and this time there'll be no speech. We're still waiting on a national test for English and mathematics from this commission. We don't have one. Do you think we need one to give us national comparisons? Do we need a test for math, a test for English, and when will we get it? And number 2, would you be opposed to bringing back the North Carolina Testing Standards Commission to let them have a hand in the test and also the standards.
I'll answer your last question first. Absolutely not. I believe that it is the work of public education to have as much input as possible. And when people come together who want to do the best thing for our 1.5 million children, then we should go forward with doing such. The second question is, your first question about national standards tests. In some respects, I can argue the advantages and disadvantages of our continuing with our North Carolina tests. One advantage is that we are assured that they are aligned with the standards. We also know that the two entities that did receive funding from the U.S. Department of Education to develop a national test, Smarter Balance and PARC, are aligning those tests to the standards in English language arts and mathematics. So it's a political question. Does North Carolina want to have a comparison of how our students do compared to other states? Or does North Carolina want to have its own standards and guess how we compare to other states? So that is the question, and there are advantages and disadvantages to the answer of both. The General Assembly does say in your statutes that we cannot move to a national test, such as that being developed and field tested now, until we have permission from the General Assembly. So at some point, the General Assembly, because of that law, will have to make that political decision. I do not favor, however, our going to any test where it puts our students at a disadvantage of having questions when we don't even know what the assessments include. That was one of the reasons why North Carolina went away from the Iowa test of basic skills, because there was no assurance that that test at that time was aligned with the standards that we taught in North Carolina.
Representative Elmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Atkinson, for being here. On our old system of evaluating standard course of study, it was staggered into 5-year increments.
The development of the standards.
Right. So we're taking the curriculum in chunks, giving us time to evaluate the costs for new materials, etc., not tackling it all at one time. Was the motivation of the state board to make the change as a whole Race to the Top grant? Is that accurate?
When the State Board of Education started on this journey, we didn't even know that there was a word, raise, or words, raised to the top. The State Board of Education made these decisions before the U.S. Office of Education released the request for proposal for Race to the Top. It was timely for North Carolina, however, because of our economic situation. In 2010, the General Assembly eliminated all funding for staff development and professional development. And we came before this body at that time and the subsequent years saying that we know what a hard time our state is facing, and because we did get that grant, then we could use the Race to the Top dollars to do the professional development, to do the development of resources. Had we not had the Race to the Top grant, our school districts would have been in a mess, because we would have had new standards, so we would have had to retreat to a place where we knew we could be in a better place.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Real quick follow-up.
Okay. The biggest complaint that I'm hearing from teachers is the lack of staff development on implementing this curriculum. And from my understanding, the Race to the Top grant was around $300 million. But your slide here shows that you used $66 million for staff development. Where is all of the other money? What did it go into? What did you spend it on?
Okay. We have a detailed budget, and I'll be glad to send that to you. In fact, we're coming before this group to go over the budget, how we spend it, where we've used it, and a great chunk of that money was spent for the purchase of technology for our school districts. The purchase of our moving from an antiquated student information system and instructional improvement to a better place. We also did contracts with our university system to provide induction or help with new teachers, and so the list goes on, and I'll be glad, because all this information is also on our website under Race to the Top, and it shows how all the dollars have been spent.
Senator Farmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will not ask the questions that I really wanted to, because some of them been answered. One of the concerns I've been hearing lately is in the Common Core, how are you preparing teachers and students with special needs, since that's not addressed specifically?
In our attachment 1, this booklet, we have a section about our work and what our exceptional children division and what we are doing with exceptional children staff across the state. I am the first to say, and it is a plea to you as you look at the budget, in order to give the support to our teachers, ongoing professional development is extremely necessary, and it cannot be a one-time deal. It has to be continued. And a part of that professional development has to be and has been a part of involving our exceptional children personnel so that they can modify the standards to that which is appropriate for our children with special needs.
Follow up.
With the Common Core standards, we know that we're going to have to do digitalized books, and books are becoming obsolete. In my county specifically is dealing with the problem. What are we doing across the state for LEAs to ensure that they're going to have the resources to do this?
The standard course of study is silent on technology. It is silent about whether we use digital textbooks or whether we use paperback books or what type of resources we use. The standard course of study just identifies what students should know and be able to do. According to the General Assembly, you have given flexibility to schools to use textbooks dollars to purchase digital textbooks. And we are in the middle of developing, as at the request of the General Assembly, we are in the middle of developing an assessment of all of our schools, where we are as far as infrastructure, so that when the time comes, regardless of whether we're using, regardless of the standards, we will be ready for 21st century learning in all of our schools. And I'll be able to answer that question better once we finish that assessment and plan, which should probably take place during the next 3 to 6 months.
Representative Speciality, then we need to move on.
Just a quick question and then a comment. Do the LEAs or the school districts or anybody, do they have the option to opt out of this Common Core thing? Or is this mandated, the whole state has to do this?
The North Carolina Constitution gives the responsibility to administer and supervise the public schools in North Carolina to the State Board of Education. To date, the State Board of Education has not allowed any school district to opt out of the standard course of study. In doing that, it would violate the general statutes 115C-81 through 83. The other thing is, when opting out of the standards, the big question is, what would you teach in lieu of those standards? And since school districts have the flexibility to add to the standards. So there have been emails that I've received. I received these in 2003, 2002, when we changed the reading test based on new standards in reading. We did get some letters from some parents saying, I don't want my child to take a test. And the answer was that this is a part of being in the public schools in North Carolina.
Follow-up, Mr. Very quick follow-up.
I just find myself in a position of, I've always been proud of North Carolina. I think it's, the greatest state in the union. But how such a great state ended up in a position where we are questioning what it is we're doing in education after the fact, after the program's been implemented. So my one quick question is, how much was this program looked into before it was actually implemented?
It saddens me really, that the people who worked so diligently from 2007 to 2010 to do the best we could for the 1.5 million children in our state. And it has become a political football, and that saddens me. If you will look in the book, The Career and College Ready, and we have verification. In fact, I sent thousands of pages to people who wanted to indicate the amount of feedback. We have estimated that over 60,000 teachers were involved in the revision of the standard course of study. They were involved in 2007, they were involved in 2008, they were involved in 2009. We put these standards on the website or in the Department of Public Instruction. In fact, for one area, social studies, we received over 10,000 emails giving us recommendations. And as a result of those recommendations, the State Board of Education decided to add a 4th year of social studies, and that course had to be U.S. history. I wish that we had a way and the money to ask 9 million people in North Carolina, what do you believe students should know and be able to do? That's why, and we've yet to come up with a way to involve every single soul in the state. But we did a due diligence effort to involve the business community, parents. In fact, as you'll see in this book, the Parent-Teacher Association helped us in getting feedback. We involved teachers, we involved principals, we involved administrators, we involved the North Carolina Business Committee for Education. We put it on our website. I myself responded, and my staff responded to lots of emails. We took those suggestions. So here we are, after we have spent, since 2006, 7, and 8, due diligence, following the laws of North Carolina, following the process in place for the standard course of study, and here we are in a place where we now have a political football, which I think is detrimental to North Carolina moving forward and doing the right thing for the kids. I'm in this business, and I ran for state superintendent for one reason. I wanted to help the 1.5 million children in our state. And consequently, I think that there are always places. I've never seen a standard that was perfect. Never in my life, and I don't think we ever will, because once the book is printed, I've always seen in my 4 times of revising standard course of study, I think, oh golly, I sure do wish we'd changed that. But we should not throw away the great work that the teachers and our principals and the Department of Public Instruction and our business community have done for the sake of what I don't know. We need to keep at the forefront the 1.5 million children that we have in our state and do the best thing for them.
Thank you, Dr. Atkinson.